More than 4,800 people die every year in Burkina Faso because of tobacco. That number would seem ordinary until you realize it is higher than many conflicts that make headlines. Under Ibrahim Traoré's rule, a country known for its defiance against foreign pressure has now declared war on smoke itself. What happens when a nation that stood up to armies decides to fight a habit that kills in silence? You're about to hear what most reports never explain: the real cost behind Burkina Faso's new war on tobacco. Beyond the numbers and the laws lies a story of lives saved, industries challenged, and a nation redefining what sovereignty means. You'll understand why Ibrahim Traoré's campaign is not just a health reform, but a moral decision that could reshape how Africa protects its people. And this isn't information for those who listen casually, because if you stop here, you'll miss how this single policy exposes a silent epidemic that has killed more citizens than road accidents, malaria, or conflict combined. You'll overlook how global tobacco lobbies operate quietly in markets where regulation is weakest. And you'll never see why this moment might mark a new model of leadership, one where survival is measured not in power, but in clean breaths. If you care about how justice looks when it's written in public health, this is the story you cannot ignore. The first surprise is simple yet sobering. Burkina Faso loses more than 4,800 lives each year to tobacco, including 1 in 300 non-smokers. These people never touched a cigarette, they just inhaled the smoke of others. It's the kind of tragedy that hides in plain sight, invisible, continuous, and deeply unfair. That number alone gives shape to the invisible. 4,800 deaths in a country of barely 22 million means tobacco kills roughly one person every 2 hours. Behind every statistic stands a worker, a mother, or a child whose home became their battlefield. This is not a slow habit, it is a quiet epidemic that spreads without alarm bells. The roots of the crisis reach back decades. Cigarettes became common through imported marketing, easy access, and a cultural tolerance that treated smoking as personal freedom. Public awareness campaigns existed, but the message drowned in poverty and imitation of Western lifestyles. As urban cafés filled with shisha pipes and new electronic devices, the danger evolved faster than the laws could adapt. The situation grew serious when hospitals began reporting surges of respiratory illness and heart disease linked directly to tobacco. Health budgets already stretched thin faced mounting costs, and families were forced into debt to treat preventable conditions. Doctors called it a slow war. One fought daily in clinics rather than on front lines. The first victims were the powerless, bus drivers inhaling smoke for 12 hours, market women selling near kiosks, children sharing rooms with addicted parents. They paid the price for choices they never made. As this awareness spread, anger grew, not just at smokers, but at a system that allowed poison to circulate freely in public air. Burkina Faso's response under Ibrahim Traoré did not start from ideology. It began with grief turned into policy. And once that grief gained direction, it became something far larger than a health campaign. The turning point came when Ibrahim Traoré framed tobacco not as a lifestyle issue, but as a national threat. For a leader often portrayed through the lens of geopolitics, this was a quieter, more human battlefield, a test of how deeply sovereignty could reach into daily life. His message was clear: protecting citizens begins with protecting their lungs. Public health officials became the first guides of this new campaign. Dr. Awa Kabore, one of the country's leading epidemiologists, recalls the day her team presented Traoré with the data. It showed that tobacco killed more people annually than malaria and road accidents combined. Her words were clinical, but his reaction was political. If this is true, he said, then silence is complicity. Within weeks, inspectors visited cafés, bus terminals, and schools to enforce smoke-free zones. Some protested, others applauded. One cafe owner in Ouagadougou confessed he had lost clients, but gained cleaner air and returning families. Another story came from a taxi driver who said his coughing stopped after the ban. These were small wins, but they gave the movement shape, visible, breathable proof of change. The initiative did not erase smoking overnight. Yet for the first time, people began to see tobacco as something shared, not private, a collective risk requiring collective restraint. As Dr. Traoré summarized in a later interview, when the air belongs to everyone, so does the responsibility. From that moment, the narrative shifted. Tobacco was no longer an individual's weakness. It was a social wound that demanded political healing. And once a government names something a wound, the process of recovery inevitably begins. It began quietly with a single decree signed in late 2023. Smoking was officially banned in all public places, buses, markets, cafés, schools, and government offices. At first, few took it seriously. Then came the enforcement. Police checkpoints appeared outside bus stations, cafés received unannounced inspections, posters warning about fines replaced tobacco ads almost overnight. The air itself started to change. Trigger phase. The spark was administrative, a document, a signature, but its ripple was emotional. Tobacco companies issued statements accusing the government of infringing personal liberties. Foreign outlets framed it as another example of authoritarian reform. But Ibrahim Traoré's administration did not retreat. They countered with data, not slogans. 800 deaths a year, 1,300 of them innocent bystanders. That number became the shield against criticism. Climax phase. The conflict escalated fast. When inspectors fined a luxury hotel for allowing shisha, it made national headlines. The elite complained, public opinion split. Street vendors began selling cigarettes discreetly, wrapped in newspapers. Black markets emerged at the city's edges, but in the capital, hospitals reported something unprecedented, a measurable drop in acute respiratory cases within just 3 months. It was too early to call it success, but it was enough to make people notice. Across neighborhoods, arguments broke out. Some saw the ban as liberation, others called it control. Students began debating whether health could justify limits on choice. In classrooms, teachers turned those debates into civic lessons. The topic moved from cafés to parliaments, from slogans to consciousness, aftershock phase. By mid-2024, the country had adapted. Public spaces grew quieter, lighter. The smell of smoke faded from government halls and transport stations. Families gathered outdoors without coughing children. Business owners who once complained now admitted revenue had stabilized as non-smokers returned. Internationally, reactions were mixed. Health organizations praised the boldness. Some Western analysts called it moral populism. But the numbers spoke for themselves. Tobacco sales fell by more than 20% nationwide, and enforcement reached 80% of monitored areas. No war, no sanction, just breath reclaimed. Inside Burkina Faso, the law became a symbol. It was no longer about cigarettes, it was about control over destiny. Citizens started saying, "If we can fight tobacco, we can fight anything." The phrase spread through radio shows and community meetings like a quiet anthem. In a region too used to defeat, the act of protecting air became proof that leadership could save lives, not just borders. By the time the dust settled, the policy had changed more than habits. It had redefined what it meant to govern. When health became the battlefield, survival turned into sovereignty. Numbers tell the story more clearly than ideology ever could. In Burkina Faso, the government's anti-tobacco policy is now supported by one of the most complete public health datasets in West Africa. It shows that the cost of inaction had been immense, measured not only in lives but in the nation's capacity to breathe freely again. The scale of the problem: each year tobacco claims more than 4,800 lives, equivalent to one Burkinabe citizen dying every 2 hours. Put differently, tobacco kills nearly 10 times more people than traffic accidents and double the toll of malaria in some regions. That figure alone explains why Ibrahim Traoré framed the issue as a public health emergency with moral dimensions. In a country where every death strains families and budgets, these losses ripple through generations. The acceleration, smoking prevalence has fallen from around 19% in the early TBNs to 13.6% today, a decline of nearly one-third. At first glance, that sounds like progress, but the absolute number of the smokers remains stubbornly high. Population growth outpaced the decline in smoking rates, meaning the total number of tobacco users actually stayed roughly constant. This contradiction illustrates the baseline to delta gap that guided new policy design. The rate of improvement hid the stagnant reality beneath it. Traoré's team understood this, which is why enforcement replaced awareness as the main lever. The human impact. About 1,300 of those annual deaths are non-smokers, victims of second-hand exposure. They include children, pregnant women, and workers in cafés, buses, and crowded homes. That translates into roughly one-third of tobacco deaths being completely involuntary. For comparison, if the same ratio held in Europe, over 200,000 non-smokers would die each year, a figure that would dominate headlines. In Burkina Faso, it remained a whisper until the government decided to measure it. The economic dimension. The Ministry of Health estimates that tobacco-related illnesses consume around 7% of national healthcare spending. That equals the cost of building and staffing 2 regional hospitals every year. Meanwhile, tobacco tax revenue represents less than half that amount, making smoking not just a health burden, but a fiscal loss. When the new law reduced cigarette consumption by 20%, the country effectively freed resources equivalent to 0.4% of GDP. In an economy of this size, that is a transformation disguised as regulation. The conclusion behind the data. These figures are not abstract. They describe a nation that decided to count its dead and then refused to accept the number. The policy may appear strict, but it is mathematically justified. Every percentage drop in smoking saves roughly 350 lives annually. Multiply that by 5 years, and the potential gain surpasses 1,700 families kept whole. In that arithmetic of survival, sovereignty, and compassion finally meet, for Ibrahim Traoré, that meeting point is what leadership was meant to achieve. Every major reform faces resistance, and Burkina Faso's tobacco ban is no exception. Even within the country, not everyone agrees on Ibrahim Traoré's approach. Critics argue that the law overreaches, that it limits individual freedom, and imposes moral choices through state power. Others fear the loss of small businesses that rely on tobacco sales, kiosks, cafés, importers. The opposition insists, you cannot legislate personal responsibility. Those are valid arguments. The principle of freedom is sacred, and it is true that behavior cannot be changed by force alone. In some Western nations, anti-smoking laws evolved gradually, through awareness and taxation rather than direct prohibition. Why, they ask, should Burkina Faso take a harder road? The government's answer is pragmatic. Time is a luxury the country cannot afford. When thousands die silently each year, gradualism becomes another form of neglect. A second criticism comes from economists. They warn that strict regulation could fuel black markets and cost the state millions in lost revenue. That concern also holds truth. Illegal trade always adapts faster than enforcement. Yet data from the first 6 months tell a different story. Legal sales dropped, but smuggling did not surge as feared. Instead, surveys show that demand itself declined, suggesting behavior change outpaced illicit supply. Both sides want health and stability. They simply disagree on the path, but when both perspectives are placed side by side, something becomes clear. The law is not only about control, it is about prioritization. Freedom without protection risks becoming privilege. Sovereignty without care risks becoming rhetoric. By testing limits now, the government exposes where balance must eventually settle. When the debate cools, what remains is this. Policies gain legitimacy not from being perfect, but from being necessary. And in a nation counting its dead by the thousands, necessity becomes the highest form of consent. And then something unexpected happened. What began as a public health regulation evolved into a statement of national identity. For Ibrahim Traoré, banning tobacco was no longer just about lungs or hospitals. It became a symbol of sovereignty. In speeches following the law's enforcement, he described tobacco control as an act of liberation from invisible colonization. That phrase hit differently. It linked nicotine addiction to dependency, not only chemical, but economic and psychological. For decades, tobacco companies had treated African markets as open frontiers, flooding them with products the West was slowly rejecting. Now a small Sahel nation was saying no, and saying it loudly. The result was not only fewer cigarettes, but a new moral vocabulary. Suddenly clean air became political, health became resistance, and choosing to quit became a patriotic act. International observers began to realize that what looked like a domestic policy was, in fact, a redefinition of independence. The fight against tobacco had turned into a proxy for a much larger question: who decides what Africans breathe, buy, and believe? From that point on, the story of smoke became the story of sovereignty itself. The effects of the new law arrived faster than anyone expected. Within months, the air in Ouagadougou's cafés and buses felt lighter. But the change went far beyond the senses. It reshaped institutions, economies, and daily life. What followed proved that a health reform can ripple through every layer of society. Government. Inside ministries, Ibrahim Traoré's stance hardened the definition of governance itself. Civil servants who once hesitated to enforce unpopular measures now carried new confidence. Public order forces began treating health protection as seriously as border defense. For the first time, local councils created air quality patrols, small civilian groups ensuring smoke-free zones in markets and schools. The policy redefined duty. Authority now meant safeguarding the invisible. Businesses. At first, tobacco vendors panicked. Sales dropped 20%. Profits shrank. Yet a curious rebound followed. Cafés adapted by branding themselves clean air spaces, attracting families and students who had avoided them for years. Pharmacies saw increased demand for nicotine replacement therapy, spawning a modest but legitimate new market. Meanwhile, local farmers began exploring alternative crops like sesame and moringa for export, proof that adaptation could outpace addiction. Citizens. Among ordinary Burkinabe, reactions ranged from relief to reflection. Parents noticed children coughing less. Teachers reported improved classroom focus after smoking was banned near schools. In rural clinics, doctors recorded a 14% drop in acute respiratory cases within 6 months. A small number statistically, yet enormous for communities where each life counts. The emotional atmosphere shifted. People started to believe that government decisions could tangibly improve daily existence, region and world. Across West Africa, observers watched closely. Senegalese and Nigerian newspapers debated whether similar measures could succeed in their countries. Some Western outlets dismissed the campaign as paternalistic, but health ministries quietly requested copies of Burkina Faso's enforcement guidelines. For the World Health Organization, the case became a model of low-budget, high-impact regulation. One regional official summarized it best: if Burkina Faso can do this with limited means, excuses elsewhere are running out. The collective outcome. By late 2025, the data drew a clear picture: national tobacco consumption down 20%, hospital cost easing, public trust rising. No riots, no collapse, only gradual relief. The law did not divide, it disciplined. And through that discipline, unity re-emerged in an unexpected form: shared responsibility. When historians look back, they may find that the real victory wasn't against tobacco, but against resignation itself. In a world fatigued by crises, Burkina Faso proved that saving lives can still be an act of national pride. From here, 3 futures stand before Burkina Faso. Each depends not on foreign aid or technology, but on endurance, the kind that Ibrahim Traoré calls the patience of builders. Base scenario: the most likely path. In the next 2 years, enforcement continues, and tobacco use declines steadily, but not dramatically. Hospitals see slower admissions for chronic lung disease, and the government channels the savings into rural clinics. Social acceptance grows. Smoking becomes something people apologize for rather than display. Resistance persists at the margins, but the habit fades like a relic of a harsher time. This is the plausible, sustainable middle ground. Progress at a human pace. Optimistic scenario, the best possible turn. If education and media partnerships deepen, the momentum could multiply. Community programs might turn the ban into a culture of prevention, especially among youth. Within 5 years, prevalence could fall below 10%, matching global success stories like Rwanda. That would mean hundreds of lives saved annually and an economy breathing easier, freed from the medical burden of preventable death. It would also cement Traoré's reform as a continental precedent, the day Africa stopped copying health models and began exporting one. Worst case scenario, the breaking point. If enforcement wanes or black markets rise, credibility could crumble. A visible return of cigarettes to public spaces would signal institutional fatigue. Opponents could claim the law was symbolic, not structural, eroding trust in leadership. That loss of moral authority would cost more than lives. It would blur the meaning of sovereignty itself. The reflection. The future will likely fall somewhere between these lines. No prediction can capture the complexity of a nation's breath. Yet one truth endures. Each cigarette not lit is an act of protection. In that simple exchange, choice for air, habit for dignity, the country's destiny unfolds one inhale at a time. Now that the smoke has lifted from statistics and policies, a question remains. What does this mean for you, the one listening to this story? Because whether you live in Ouagadougou or oceans away, the air you breathe is still a shared space. If you are among those who follow events closely, researchers, students, or advocates, you already understand how Ibrahim Traoré's policy rewired an entire system. But knowledge alone is fragile. Stay alert to new data. Keep tracing how enforcement evolves and demand transparency in numbers, not just headlines. Awareness, in this context, is both shield and compass. If you are indirectly affected, a cafe owner, a transport worker, a parent, this shift will touch your daily rhythm. You might face small inconveniences, signs, rules, inspections, yet these are signals of a culture learning to protect itself, plan, adapt, and see these measures not as limits, but as shared insurance for the future. And if you are among those who feel detached, thinking it does not concern you, remember that indifference is its own kind of exposure. When others decide what fills the air, silence becomes consent. You don't need to march or legislate. Simply caring enough to stay informed is a form of defense. Because no matter where you stand, understanding this story keeps you from being left behind. It keeps your breath yours. Change only matters if it can be carried forward. That is why Burkina Faso's anti-tobacco law is more than a decree. It's a framework for how public health can be enforced in fragile systems. As Ibrahim Traoré often reminds his ministers, discipline is policy made visible. Step 1. Leadership and coordination. At the top level, the Ministry of Health continues to lead, but with greater cross-sector support. Interior and Education ministries now coordinate on enforcement and awareness, ensuring consistency from cities to rural areas. Their goal for 2026 is clear: full compliance in all public buildings and transport hubs. Success is measured not by arrests but by air quality readings and hospital admissions. Step 2. Business and institutional adaptation. Private sectors, especially hospitality and transport, are being trained to self-monitor. Certification programs reward smoke-free venues with tax incentives and public promotion. Companies that invest in clean air compliance earn reputational gains, turning health into branding. Step 3. Citizens and communities. Ordinary people remain the law's backbone. Local councils organize monthly air days, neighborhood initiatives for education, cleanup, and medical checks. Community radio programs keep citizens updated on results and invite feedback from those affected. If every district achieves a 10% drop in smoking by 2027, the combined impact could save more than 1,000 lives. Step 4. Regional cooperation. Finally, the roadmap expands beyond borders. Burkina Faso is working with ECOWAS partners to harmonize tobacco regulations, share data, and resist cross-border smuggling. It's a small alliance, but one with continental implications. Because in this fight, consistency is survival, and enforcement is compassion in action. The story circles back to where it began, to the quiet courage of those who decided that clean air was worth defending. Months after the ban, Dr. Awa Cabaret stands again in the same hospital corridor where she once counted the dying. Now the beds are fewer, the coughs quieter. It is not victory yet, but it is visible healing. Ibrahim Traoré rarely speaks in sentimental tones, yet his policy became an emotional language of its own. It told people that leadership could mean protection, not command, that sovereignty could live in breath, not just borders. It gave citizens permission to believe in the small miracles that come from collective will. From decree to discipline, from fear to relief, Burkina Faso's journey turned the statistic into a story, and the story into survival. It is a reminder that reform, at its heart, is not about control. It is about care made measurable, because when a nation learns to guard its air, it has already begun to guard its soul. Every person who listens to this story will feel it differently. Some will hear policy, others will hear promise. But beneath the facts and figures lies something more personal, the quiet recognition that breath connects us all. If you believe this story matters, let it travel. Share it with someone who thinks public health is just bureaucracy, or with someone who still doubts that leadership can save lives. Because awareness is contagious too, and understanding is the first vaccine against indifference. Burkina Faso's decision under Ibrahim Traoré is not a tale of perfection. It is a lesson in persistence. It shows that nations, like people, grow stronger when they protect what is most fragile. And when one country refuses to breathe in silence, others begin to exhale hope. So the next time you see smoke rising, in a room, in a system, or in a story, remember this. Clean air is not a privilege. It's proof that we still care enough to change.